So he's got this Rwanda immigration plan.
Yeah.
And he's tried his very best. He's had the plane on the runway.
Yes.
He's had the refuelling tanker there, filling up the plane on the runway. And he's been thwarted, of course,
by lefty lawyers, which, of course, the Bar Council and the security services have asked politicians to stop talking about lawyers in those terms, because it could be construed as almost an incitement to violence. We've had one terror attack upon an immigration law firm, but it hasn't stopped Priti Patel or Boris Johnson or the Daily Mail from continuing down this path. It's 1 minute after 12. If you're just tuning in, Theo's a bit out of breath because he ran down to the studio. Don't worry, it's nothing more serious than that. A few of you expressing concern. Dan suggests we need to implement a fitness regime if Theo is going to continue at LBC whilst this government is in power, while Jinxie points out, I think perhaps a little unfairly, but, come one, come all on this programme. Let me get this quote correct. I don't want to misrepresent it. With all this panting, it's quite clear that Theo Usherwood has not been practising his sashaying, galloping, bounding, etc. when summoned by Mr. James O.B.
Jinxie, that's not fair.
Well, yeah,
I have.
We will be crossing live to the House of Commons as soon as Sir Keir Starmer gets to his feet, which I suspect will be imminent.
It's the next question.
So, cost of living. That's it? All six? What would I want to just quickly before we cross live? What would we pull? What would you pull out of the bag if you were the leader of the opposition? Apart from cost of living, if you wanted to find some other area, is there no wedge you can drive into the party? Right, we go live now to the House of Commons.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Can I pay tribute to all those who served in the Falklands? My uncle was among them, serving on the HMS Antelope when it went down. Thankfully, he made it back, but too many serving in that war didn't, and we remember them all. Yeah. Mr. Speaker, Britain is set for lower growth than every major economy except Russia. Why?
Prime Minister.
Mr. Speaker, I'll tell him. Mr. Speaker, actually, we are going to have, according to the IMF and the OECD, we are, in addition to the fastest growth in the G7 last year, we're going to have the second fastest this year, and we will return to the top of the table, Mr. Speaker. But the reason, Mr. Speaker, other countries are temporarily moving ahead is, of course, because we came out of the pandemic faster than they did, because we took the right decisions to come out of lockdown, which he opposed, Mr. Speaker. And that's why, right now, Mr. Speaker, we have the highest number of people on payroll employment on record, Mr. Speaker.
Mr. Speaker, he always likes to blame global forces, but global forces are just that, global. Everybody faces them. Britain isn't under crippling economic sanctions like Russia. No wonder he doesn't want to answer the question, why is the UK set for lower growth than every other major economy?
Prime Minister.
Mr. Speaker, I think everybody can see that I've just answered the question. Once again, he's guilty of what my legal friends call ignoratio elenchi. He's failed to listen to what I've actually said, Mr. Speaker. What would be useful in supporting the UK economy right now would be if the leader of the Labour Party ended his sphinx-like silence about the RMT strikes coming up in the course of the next couple of weeks. Will he now break with his shadow Transport Secretary and denounce Labour's rail strikes?
He's in government.
Look, just to remind the Prime Minister, he seems to have gone. His Prime Minister's question is the opposition question. Keir Starmer.
He's in government. He could do something to stop the strikes, but he hasn't lifted a finger. I don't want the strikes to go ahead, but he does. He wants, Mr. Speaker, he wants the country to grind to a halt so he can feed off the division. And as for Mr. Speaker, as for his boasting about the economy, he thinks he can perform Jedi mind tricks on the country. These aren't the droids you're looking for. No rules were broken. The economy is booming. The problem is, the Force just isn't with him anymore. He thinks he's Obi-Wan Kenobi. The truth is, he's Jabba the Hutt. Last week, he stood there and boasted that we would continue to grow the economy. This week, it turns out, the economy shrank for the second month in a row.
Yeah.
How does it help Britain to have an ostrich Prime Minister with his head in the sand?
There he goes again, Mr. Speaker, running this country down when everybody we've got the highest payroll employment.
Look, I want to hear the questions and the answers, and whether you like it. But I genuinely believe it.
The reason why he has to keep saying payroll there is because he's repeatedly misled the House about employment figures. So it's good that he's corrected that calumny.
We've got the highest number of people in payroll jobs, as I've just said, 620,000 more since records began. And he might like to know this, that just in the first 5 months of this year, this country has attracted, I think, £16 billion of investment in its tech sector. He doesn't like these European comparisons. Let's make it for him. 3 times as much as Germany, twice as much as France, Mr. Speaker. He should be talking this country up, not running it down.
That's the ostrich. He's not just denying how bad things are, he's actively making things worse. His 15 tax rises are throttling growth, and the director of the CBI is so fed up, he's reduced to saying, can we stop Operation Save Big Dog and move to action stations on the economy? Now, Mr. Speaker, we know what the Prime Minister says about British business in private. I think that's pretty unparliamentary. But when did screwing business turn from a flippant comment into economic policy?
Well, Mr. Speaker, look, I just reminded the House of what's happening in Tech Week in this country, the massive investment that's coming in, helped, by the way, by this 130% super deduction for business investment that my right honourable friend, the Chancellor, has put in. Never forget, Mr. Speaker, that Labour, under Labour, taxes go up on businesses and on people. We're not only putting £1,200 more into people's pockets, we're having a tax cut worth £330. He talks about taxes, £330 on average for everybody who pays national insurance. Labour have already made spending commitments in this Parliament alone worth £94 billion more than the government is spending. That's £2,100 for every household in the country, Mr. Speaker. No wonder no Labour government has ever left office with unemployment lower than when they came in.
Mr. Speaker, 15 tax rises, and we're sacked for the highest tax burden since rationing. He says the economy is booming when it's shrinking. He's game playing so much. He thinks he's on Love Island. Trouble is, Prime Minister, I'm reliably informed that contestants that give the public the ick get booted out. And it's not just low growth. He's also lost control of inflation. He was warned about this last September. And what did he do? He dismissed it. He didn't act. He sat on his hands. Now prices are through the roof, and we're set to have the highest inflation in the G7. When will he accept he got it badly wrong when he claimed that worries about inflation were unfounded?
Mr. Speaker, we're helping people with the cost of living with £1,200. On the 14th of July, the money will be going into people's bank accounts. Why can we do that, Mr. Speaker? Because we have the fiscal firepower to do it, because the economy is in robust shape, with record numbers of people in payroll employment, Mr. Speaker. And that is thanks to the steps that we took that he continuously opposed. And if he wants to, I'd like to remind Mr. Speaker, he has a chance. I won't say this interrogatively, Mr. He has the chance now to clear it up. He can oppose the Labour's rail strikes right now. Say he can disagree. He can disagree, and give him that opportunity. Let him disagree with the union barons who would add to people's costs in the coming weeks.
Mr. Speaker, I don't want the strikes to go ahead. He does so he can feed on the division. Mr. Speaker, Mr. Speaker, they're making a lot of noise now, but I've got a long list here of what his MPs really think of him. Dragging everyone down. Who said that? Come on. Who was it said that? Authority is destroyed. Come on, hands up. Which of you was it? Which of you? Come on. Can't win back trust. Anybody owning up? You're very quiet now. Hands. Mr. Speaker, my personal favourite is this. This is a document circulated by his backbench, in which they call him the Conservative Corbyn. Exactly. Prime Minister, I don't think that was intended as a compliment. Week after week, he stands there and spouts the same nonsense. The economy's booming. Everything's going swimmingly. The people should be grateful. But whilst he's telling Britain that we never had it so good, millions of working people and businesses know the reality. Britain's growth is going to be slower than our competitors and our inflation higher. A Prime Minister who sounds totally deluded, totally failing on the economy, failing to tackle...
I think we need to get to the end of the question, but I'll just remind you, I will hear the end of the question in silence. Any more noise in this corner, there'll be another cup of tea early if we're not careful. Here's
a Prime Minister who sounds totally deluded, totally failing the economy, failing to tackle inflation, failing to back business, failing to help working people through the crisis. And, Mr. Speaker, his big idea, go back to imperial measurements. He's got 80s inflation, 70s stagnation, now he wants 60s wage to complete the set. When is he going to ditch the gimmicks and face up to reality that under him Britain's economy is going backwards?
Let's see the Prime Minister. Prime Minister.
Mr. Speaker, a couple of quick points about Mr. Corbyn, the Right Honourable for Islington North. First of all, he tried repeatedly to get him elected as Prime Minister. Mr. Speaker. Secondly, speaking from experience, he's relatively dynamic by comparison with the Right Honourable Gentleman, Mr. Speaker. Dynamic and coherent.
Might be helpful if you speak to me. I'm struggling to hear because of the noise on both sides. So please, if you look to the chair, it'll be easier for both of us.
But what we're going to get on and do, Mr. Speaker, is continue to take the tough decisions to take this country forward, and decisions that are on the side of the British people, Mr. Speaker. They're blatantly on the side of the RMT union barons. When there are some ticket offices that barely sell one ticket per hour, Mr. Speaker, we are on the side of the travelling public. By the way, he hasn't mentioned this, but they're on the side of the people traffickers who would risk people's lives at sea, Mr. Speaker. And we are on the side of people who come here safely and legally. Safely and legally, Mr. Speaker. They carp and snipe from the sidelines. That's what they've always done. We take the big decisions to take this country forward. And no matter how much Welly his right honourable friend, the deputy leader, may ask him to apply, it doesn't matter how much Welly he pretends to apply, when that Welly, Mr. Speaker, is always on the left foot.
Many areas like mine have already had massive new housing development with no commensurate increase in general practice.
Sorry. Point of order. The Honourable Lady's been here for so long, she should also know that points of order can only come at the end. Sandra Sullivan.
Oh dear.
Many areas.
Have a conversation later, but certainly it's not. Andrew Sullivan.
Many areas like mine have already had massive new housing development with no commensurate increase in general practice capacity. In one of my surgeries, with double the recommended number of patients per GP, a bowel cancer diagnosis of a 51-year-old father of 4 was missed and is now terminal. Getting this right is a life and death issue. So will the Prime Minister make sure that parts of the country that have already had massive new housing growth get the commensurate increase in general practice capacity that is only right and fair?
Prime Minister.
Yes, Mr. Speaker, and of course we've increased the numbers of doctors by 6,000, up to 1,200 more GPs since this time last year, 11,800 more nurses, but we must make sure that areas, particularly where areas of new sensitive development is going in, that there are the infrastructure services, particularly medical services, that they need. The NHS has a statutory duty to take account of population growth. I know he's met my honourable friend, the Health Secretary. I will take it up personally to make sure we get a proper approach to, I think, a very, very important issue.
Ian Blackford.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. And can I join you and others that are remembering today the Falklands conflict of 40 years ago, and those like my colleague Keith Brown, the Scottish Justice Minister that served there, and in particular our thoughts are with those that paid the ultimate sacrifice. Mr. Speaker, yesterday our First Minister started a national conversation on Scotland's right to choose an independent future. When we look at nations like Iceland, Ireland, Norway and Denmark, it is clear that our neighbours are outperforming the United Kingdom. They deliver greater income equality, lower poverty rates, higher productivity, social mobility and business investment. Mr. Speaker, the list goes on and on. The evidence is overwhelming. Scotland is being held back by Westminster. Prime Minister, all those countries can use the powers of independence to create wealthier, fairer and greener societies. Why not Scotland?
Prime Minister.
Well, Mr. Speaker, I don't doubt my right honourable friend's talents as a conversationalist, but I think there are other subjects in the national conversation right now, and they include, Mr. Speaker, what we're doing to come through the aftershocks of COVID with the strongest jobs-led recovery of any European economy. As I said, 620,000 more people across the whole of the UK, Mr. Speaker, in payroll employment than there were before the pandemic began. And I think another subject of national conversation is investment into our whole country, investment in Scotland, investment across the whole of the UK, as I mentioned already, in the tech centre, and the whole of the UK standing strong together on the international stage and sticking up for the Ukrainians. I think that's some of the things that the country is also talking about, Mr. Speaker.
Prime Minister.
Yes, stronger together. Has the Prime Minister seen the pound? I think the financial markets are giving their judgment on this Prime Minister. You know, Mr. Speaker, the Prime Minister can afford to live in his own little world, his own little Britain. But people have to live with the reality of a failing Westminster system. A cost of living crisis worse in the UK than any other G7 country. An inflation rate double that of France. The second worst economic growth forecast in the G20, next to only sanction Russia. And now a threat of a trade war with our European friends, triggered by a law-breaking Prime Minister. That is not a vision for the future of Scotland. Our nation is big enough, rich enough and smart enough. Isn't it the case, Prime Minister, that Scotland simply can't afford to remain trapped in the failing Westminster system? Mr. Speaker, stop the world. Scotland wants to get on.
Minister.
Mr. Speaker, I think that the figures speak for themselves. The UK has record numbers of people in payroll employment. That's an astounding thing when you consider where we were during the pandemic. That was because of the UK working well together, as he will remember, with the vaccine rollout, with the testing, which Scotland and the rest of the country cooperated brilliantly. And, Mr. Speaker, he talks about a trade war. He talks about a trade war. What could be more foolish, Mr. Speaker, than a project that actually envisages trade barriers within parts of the United Kingdom? That's what we're trying to break down.
Craig Tracy.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. During the Jubilee celebrations, I was honoured to share part of them with Cohort 4, an inspirational mentoring and support group who provide life-changing support to a wide range of women, such as those who've tragically been the victim of domestic violence, sexual abuse, or suffer from mental health difficulties. Sadly, as a result of the
with
panic
the time at
pandemic,
20
the
minutes
police
after
services
12, we take our traditional step back from events at PMQs, which we will be analysing in the company of LBC's esteemed political editor, Theo Usherwood, after these words. 23 minutes after 12 is the time. The former Prime Minister Theresa May is scheduled to ask a question, so we will try, albeit that we are in thrall to the technology, we'll try to cross live for that like proper grown-up broadcasters, but until then it's the normal kindergarten level with me and Theo Usherwood. That was actually kindergarten-ish.
It was
one of the most raucous and cacophonous.
Culture.
I'm told by one person watching that most of the noise was coming from the Tory benches rather than the Labour benches, but I don't know.
So Keir Starmer needed to up his game after last week. He went with the one-liners.
They were quite good jokes as well. I wonder if he's got someone new on his team.
Trying to bring in his youth credentials, talking about Boris Johnson giving voters, I think it's called the ick.
I don't really follow that. That's a
on Love Island,
is it?
and they tend to get booted off.
Right.
And then for our generation, James, he was talking about. I was actually going to say you might be a little bit of a generation above me. So there was Star Wars reference, Jabba the Hutt.
Yeah, but that's not
Obi-Wan Kenobi.
Yeah, but there's a new Disney Obi-Wan Kenobi series, so that's got resonance with all generations now.
Right.
It's just started, and in fact, the new episodes drop on Wednesday night, so he's particularly on point.
On point. But it was interesting to hear the Prime Minister come back. Keir Starmer, of course, talking about the economy, as we predicted that he would do, comparing us to having the worst performance as Russia. Boris Johnson comes back with the wedge issue, this one, calling it Labour's strikes and asking him to side one way or the other with the RMT. Now, Keir Starmer has said that he is on the side of the public and he wants the government to sort out.
It's quite an interesting exchange, that, wasn't it? Because he didn't condemn the RMT, but Boris Johnson almost proved his point that he was going to relish the opportunity to use the strikes as
call some Labour strike. I mean, it's
a grounds for division.
It's slightly. It's difficult when you do this job to sometimes use neutral language.
Sure.
But the point I'm making
I'm
is.
very grateful I don't need to try.
I do.
I know you do, and you do a brilliant job of it.
So the thing is that Keir Starmer isn't involved in the strike action. The Labour Party, OK, it receives support from the trade unions. Actually, the RMT isn't affiliated to the Labour Party.
No, of course.
It was previously affiliated to the Labour Party when Jeremy Corbyn was leaving, but it's not now. And of course, Keir Starmer isn't responsible for the RMT. He is not ever going to be invited to negotiations between the RMT, Network Rail, ministers from the Department of Transport. Nevertheless...
It doesn't have to be true to work, does it? That's the point.
Nevertheless, and you had that petition from Oliver Dowden, the chairman of the Conservative Party, earlier in the week, saying sign the petition against Labour's strikes. Labour aren't involved in the equation.
That was a very odd intervention from a government minister to
He's not a minister, he's a chairman of the Conservative Party.
Fair enough, a former government minister, to try to get to petition the opposition.
No, petition people against the opposition.
About the opposition
as
when
if they
you're
were
actually
in power.
in government. It was bizarre, that, wasn't
as if
it?
they had a way
yes,
of...
No, that's the point that I'm making, in case people don't understand. Anyway, I suppose trying to work out what passes for Oliver Dowden's thought processes is a waste of everybody's time.
But it is interesting that Boris Johnson, we had Rwanda yesterday, now we've got the trade unions today, and actually the Labour leader doesn't have any... He's not involved in those negotiations. Now, of course, Keir Starmer doesn't want to fall into the trap of denouncing the RMT because he faces his own pressure from his own side on the left of the party, particularly. But at the same time, he can't be seen to side by he can't go the other way and side with the Conservative Party because then he would be equally in trouble.
I thought he dealt with it quite well, and Johnson did end up sounding as if he was going to relish using it for division. And I think you were right to predict that Keir Starmer wouldn't go near Rwanda, but it appeared to take Boris Johnson by surprise because he had pre-prepared points to make about it, which he then had to...
He couldn't make.
He tried to make them while conceding that Keir Starmer hadn't even mentioned it.
but what's the other bit of just context on the trade union stuff is it's worth... You know, we've heard from Wes Streeting, we've heard from Lisa Nandy, where they've actually taken a much more supportive stance of the RMT. But all the while, in the background, we do have this Durham police investigation that's ongoing. And those behind Keir Starmer, who would always claim to be supportive of his leadership, also got one eye on the fact that he might have to resign. And if he were to resign because of the Durham police investigation, then they want to be front and centre of any leadership contest, and they can't win that contest if they're toxic to the left of the party.
To the trade unions in particular, it's all very true. Any sign of Theresa May? Are we keeping a close eye on proceedings?
She's not actually. Funnily enough, she's not listed, but she is standing up and down when it's time to call a question. So we would, and she's a very senior MP as a former Prime Minister.
Expect her to
so
be
you would
called.
expect her to be called.
Want to take a punt on what she's hoping to ask about?
Well, she's a former Home Secretary.
She is.
So that might be a clue.
And speaking of Home Secretaries, we are probably going to take the news bulletin as scheduled and then return, and hold on to your hats, with Priti Patel's latest contribution to the national pageant, this time regarding the plane that didn't take off with any asylum seekers on it at all. Remarkable how many people yesterday were still unaware, until my conversation with a caller from Watford went a bit viral. They were still unaware that all of these applications begin and end in Rwanda. Even if you are found to have fled a torturous, murderous regime with perfect grounds for doing so, and your application is successful in Rwanda, you stay in Rwanda. Nobody is coming back. The number of people who thought that it was some sort of offshore processing scheme, as opposed to a despicable abnegation of all of our duties as a major democratic power, was breathtaking. An appalling failure of journalism. I can't believe people haven't been hit over the head with the fact that if the applications are successful, you still stay in Rwanda. But that didn't come up.
The only
What
exchange.
did you think of the jokes? What did you think of the jokes?
The jokes.
Did you like it? Are you allowed to offer an opinion on this, or will you be pleading as ever your impartiality?
The jokes. Mixed reception to the jokes. I just think it was interesting that Keir Starmer at least attempted the jokes after what happened last week of being boring. And of course, and after, of course, the fact he's been accused of being boring. That seems to be what a pollster who previously worked for Theresa May found in a poll earlier this week.
12:30 is the time. Amelia Cox is here now with your headlines. 12:32 is the time. So you wait ages for an intervention from a Home Secretary, and then two come along at once. We are waiting for a statement from Priti Patel on the disastrous attempts to deport refugees to Rwanda, but we're also wondering whether Theresa May will catch the Speaker's eye, because, as Theo Usherwood described it, she is jumping up and down in the hope of being called to ask a question, and that is an intervention of sufficient significance as to merit our attention, I think. So stand by for that. And fans of the banterous attempts by Theo and I to fill these periods of time on broadcast while waiting for other things to happen will be delighted to learn that's what we will now be doing for the foreseeable future.
Just to bring you up on to date on the David Buttress, who is, of course,
to tell people who he is.
So he is the boss of Just Eat. He was appointed earlier in the week Boris Johnson's cost of living SAR to help with the cost of living, and then of course it subsequently emerged very shortly afterwards.
You say, of course, not everyone is as anarchy as we are.
It emerged immediately afterwards that he had tweeted not so long ago that he thought Boris Johnson needed to resign as Prime Minister. And
his Twitter account was a veritable cornucopia of criticism of Boris Johnson, often quite fruity and colourful.
Yes, it was. Anyway, he's just released a statement, and I'd love to tell you what's in the statement.
Yeah.
But he's just deleted it.
How long was the statement live for, do we think?
3 minutes.
3 minutes. And do we know what was in it?
No. Nobody took a screen.
Read it. Someone must have read it. Can anyone tell us what was in it? This is a fellow who's been given an unpaid job in government to advise on food and cost of living as well, I think, is it? Or
yes.
Yes, cost of living czar. I think there's so many czars. But turned out to have been one of the most outspoken critics from the world of business of Boris Johnson on his Twitter account. So he spent most of yesterday afternoon furiously trying to delete all of these tweets, and he's now issued a statement which he subsequently deleted. Whether he furiously deleted it or not, or tried to, I do not know. So,
but I can't tell you what's in it.
So we'll try and find out. If anyone's been paying closer attention than our political editor, Theo Usherwood, to this story, then do feel free to ring in and give us a quick run-through or a walk-through of what was in David Buttress's deleted statement. We should talk about, because you can be damn sure that Boris Johnson and Keir Starmer won't. We should talk about what Maros Sefcovic had to say. I've got to, first of all, memo to self, stop calling him Mario. It's Maros Sefcovic.
So, of course, he's the chief negotiator on Brexit for the European Commission, dealing with the Northern Ireland Protocol for the Commission. And he's just announced this morning that he's going to be taking, or the European Commission is going to be taking legal action against the British government because of this new legislation. He says, let there be no doubt, there is no legal nor political justification whatsoever for unilaterally changing an international agreement. Opening the door to unilaterally changing an international agreement is a breach of international law as well. So let's call a spade a spade. This is illegal. Close quotes. And that was he also told reporters that he's sure the UK government knew perfectly well what they signed up to when they agreed to the protocol. That was, of course, in October 2019. The deal was signed by Boris Johnson. And then he goes on to say, although I have to admit, they don't do a very good job explaining it to the public. And of course, this is the first response from the European side since Liz Truss, the Foreign Secretary, published it.
And here's Theresa May. Thank
you, Mr. Speaker. My constituent, Dominique Davis, is the niece of Dom Phillips, the British journalist missing in Brazil, alongside the Indigenous expert Bruno Pereira. Will my right honourable friend ensure that the government makes this case a diplomatic priority and that it works to do everything it can to ensure that the Brazilian authorities put the resources necessary to uncover the truth and find out what has happened to Dom and Bruno?
I thank my right honourable friend very much, and I can tell her that for representing the niece of Dom Phillips. And of course, like everybody in this House, we're deeply concerned about what may have happened to him. FCDO officials are working closely now with the Brazilian authorities following his disappearance on the 5th of June. The minister responsible has raised the issue repeatedly, the search and rescue effort with Brazil's Justice and Public Security Minister. And what we've told the Brazilians, Mr. Speaker, is we stand ready to provide, Madam Deputy Speaker, I should say, we stand ready to provide all the support that they may need.
Thank you. Point of order, Slane
No, fairly straightforward. I think we were possibly wondering whether Theresa May might be critical of the government, but that was really her in constituency MP mode, calling upon Boris Johnson, the man who, of course, Nazanin Zaghari-Ratcliffe credits with making her plight as a prisoner of the Iranian regime much worse than it needed to be, asking for his help and support in dealing with this missing British journalist in the Amazon. David Buttress,
his tweet's back up.
His statement has gone back up again. So he's the government's new cost of living business czar.
Yes.
I mean, we wouldn't even have noticed his appointment if it wasn't for the fact that his Twitter account looked a bit like mine when it came to the way that it talked about Boris Johnson. But here he is expressing how proud and excited he is to have a real go at doing something about the challenge of cost of living.
Yes, helping communities, working families, we can make a difference the next 6 months, and I will pour everything I have into it.
Well, good luck to him, to be fair. He's clearly quite a good judge of character, isn't he, given the... well, you can't comment on that. So we're waiting for Priti Patel now. How long is it going to be?
We've just got a point of order in the House of Commons at the moment. I don't know what it's on. That's just when MPs get to say, well, does somebody need to correct the record? And then it'll be over to Priti Patel, the Home Secretary, to deliver her statement. As I said, it's about 8 minutes, and then we'd expect Yvette Cooper to come back off that and then listen out for...
Probably take us up to Sheila time.
It may well do. And then, of course, it'll be interesting to listen to what Conservative backbenchers have to say in response, talk about whether the government should withdraw from the European Court or reform the Human Rights Act, so we're not necessarily involved in...
Did we miss a trick with Ian Blackford? Did he talk about the idiocy, or that Boris Johnson responded to Blackford by talking about how it would be idiotic to put up trading barriers with your biggest trading partner?
I did tweet that.
Did you?
I did tweet that. I didn't mention it on air.
Did you mention it on the big show? Did you mention it on the big show? Should we have a little listen to it?
Yeah, let's listen.
Can we have a little listen to it?
Yeah, we can, yeah.
How hard will that be? We haven't got it.
I can read you the quote.
I'd rather have it live with a bit of atmos.
I'm not going to do an accent.
Boris Johnson impression.
No.
Everybody's got a Boris.
Ian Blackford said, and he's making the point, of course, that with the cost of living crisis and Scotland looking towards the deal that Northern Ireland has, where it has access to the single market and the customs union, saying that Scotland can't afford to stay in the failed Westminster system, as he put it. And the Prime Minister comes back and says, what could be more foolish than a project that envisages trade barriers within the UK?
Incredible, really. He's introduced trade barriers within the UK.
Yes.
It's not an opinion, mate. That's just counting. He literally is the first Prime Minister ever to introduce trade barriers within the UK.
But he's going to sort that out.
Yeah,
because he's introduced legislation.
People can't tell when you're being facetious, can they? 12:40 is the time, so we're waiting for Priti Patel to come along to talk about why that plane last night didn't take off. Well, we know why it didn't take off. It's because the legal cases put forward by various lawyers were sound enough to see their clients reprieved, perhaps temporarily. And of course we won't know, will we, until July, whether the whole scheme is lawful or not. So why they pressed ahead with it. The problem, as ever, with analysing this government's behaviour is that 52% of people will probably be of the view that they have done it deliberately as some sort of dead cat to distract from Partygate or the vote of no confidence in the Prime Minister or the continuing economic travails that the country is facing, many of them self-inflicted. And then, of course, 48% of us would take the view that they're not that sophisticated and they don't have plans. And yes, they constantly try to introduce wedge issues, but that was conceived in the hope of actually being able to boast about deporting desperate people to Rwanda, and they failed to do so. So I got competence, cock up or conspiracy is usually the choices, isn't it? Cock up or conspiracy. And well, time now for the Home Secretary, Priti Patel.
World-leading migration and economic development partnership with Rwanda. The British people have repeatedly voted for controlled immigration and the right to secure borders, Madam Deputy Speaker. This is a government that acts and hears that message clearly, and we are determined to deliver that. Last night, Madam Deputy Speaker, we aimed to relocate the first people from our country who arrived here through dangerous and illegal means, including by small boat. Over the course of this week, many and various claims to prevent relocation have been brought forward. Now, Madam Deputy Speaker, I welcome the decisions of our domestic courts, the High Court, the Court of Appeal, and Supreme Court to uphold our right to send the flight. However, following a decision by an out-of-hours judge in the European Court of Human Rights in Strasbourg, minutes before our flight's departure, the final individuals remaining on the flight had their removal directions paused while their claims were considered. I want to make something absolutely clear today, Madam Deputy Speaker. The European Court of Human Rights did not rule that the policy or relocations were unlawful, but they prohibited the removal of 3 of those on last night's flight. Those prohibitions last for different time periods, but are not an absolute bar on their transfer to Rwanda. Anyone who's been ordered to be released by the courts will be tagged while we continue to progress their relocation. While this decision by the Strasbourg Court to intervene was disappointing and surprising given the repeated and considered judgments to the contrary in our domestic courts, we remain committed to this policy. These repeated legal barriers are, Madam Deputy Speaker, very similar to those that we experience with all other removal flights, and we believe that we are fully compliant with our domestic and international obligations, and preparations for our future flights and the next flights have already begun. Our domestic courts were of the view that the flight could go ahead. Madam Deputy Speaker, the case for our partnership with Rwanda bears repeating. We are a generous and welcoming country, as has been shown time and time again. Over 20,000 people have used safe and legal routes to come to the UK since 2015. And most recently, Madam Deputy Speaker, Britons have opened their hearts and their homes to Afghan nationals and Ukrainian nationals. But our capacity to help those in need is severely compromised by those who come here illegally. And as we've discussed in this House many, many times, who seek to jump the queue because they can afford to pay the people smugglers. It is illegal. It is not necessary because they are coming from other safe countries. It is not fair either on those who play by the rules or on the British taxpayers who have to foot this bill. We cannot keep on spending nearly £5 million a day on accommodation, including that of hotels. We cannot accept this intolerable pressure on public services and local communities. It makes us less safe as a nation because those who come here illegally do not have the regularised checks or even the regularised status. And because evil people smuggling gangs use the proceeds of their ill-gotten gains to fund other appalling crimes that undermine the security of our country. It is also lethally dangerous for those who are smuggled. People have drowned at sea, suffocated in lorries, and perished crossing territories. The humane, decent and moral response to all of this is simply not to stand by and let people down, or to be sold into slavery, or to be smuggled, but to stop this. And with that, Madam Deputy Speaker, inaction is not an option, or at least not a morally responsible one. This is, as I've said repeatedly, a complex, long-standing problem. The global asylum system is broken, and between 80 to 100 million people are now displaced, and others are on the move, seeking better economic opportunities. And an international problem requires international solutions. The UK and Rwanda have shown the way forward by working together. And this partnership sends a clear message that illegal entry will not be tolerated, Madam Deputy Speaker, while offering a practical, humane way forward for those who arrive to the UK via illegal routes. It has saddened me, Madam Deputy Speaker, to see Rwanda so terribly misrepresented and traduced in recent weeks. It is another example of how all too often critics not only don't know what they're speaking about, but seek to vilify another international country that has a good track record when it comes to refugees and stepping up to international responsibilities. Rwanda, Madam Deputy Speaker, is a safe and secure country with an outstanding track record of supporting refugees and asylum seekers. And indeed, we are proud that we are working together, proud that the UK is investing in Rwanda and helping that great country to thrive, and proud that those who are relocated to Rwanda will have an opportunity to thrive as well. They will be given generous support, including language skills, vocational training, and help with starting their own businesses or finding employment. But of course, I'm afraid, Madam Deputy Speaker, the usual suspects, with the blessings of honourable and right honourable members opposite, have set out to thwart and even campaign against these efforts, and with that, Madam Deputy Speaker, the will of the British people. It would be wrong to issue a running commentary over ongoing cases, but Madam Deputy Speaker, I would like to say this. This government will not be deterred from doing the right thing. We will not be put off by the inevitable legal last-minute challenges, nor we will allow mobs, Madam Deputy Speaker, to block removals. We will not stand idly by and let organised crime gangs, who are despicable in their nature and their conduct, evil people, treat human beings as cargo. We will not accept that we have no right to control our borders, Madam Deputy Speaker. We will do everything necessary to keep this country safe, and we will continue our long and proud tradition of helping those in genuine need. Now, many of us have met refugees, both abroad and on British soil, and listened to the stories that are quite frankly chilling and heartbreaking. But of course it suits the benches opposite to pretend that this side of the House doesn't care. But Madam Deputy Speaker, as you referred to in the earlier point of order, on this side of the House, such accusations are a grotesque slur. And let me tell you, Madam Deputy Speaker, what is truly chilling is listening to opponents going on about how awful this policy is, while offering no practical solutions, while lives are being lost. Helping develop safe and legal routes to this country for those who really need them is absolutely at the heart of this government's work. And having overseen efforts to bring to the UK thousands of people in absolute need, including from Hong Kong, Syria, Afghanistan and Ukraine. And I am the first to say that controlled immigration is good for our country, outstanding for our country, including that by refugees. But, Madam Deputy Speaker, we simply have to focus on the support of those who need it the most. and not those who have picked the UK as a destination over a safe country like France. And it is no use pretending that they are fleeing persecution when they are travelling from a safe country, because our capacity to help is not infinite, and public support for the asylum system will be fatally undermined if we do not act. And along with the critics of the Migration and Economic Development Partnership have no alternative proposal to deal with uncontrolled immigration. And like on so many other issues, the parties opposite, the Labour Party and the SNP, are on the wrong side of the argument, and we will only see with their arguments public trust in the system being corroded. That is irresponsible and utterly indifferent to those who we seek to help and support. Now, Madam Deputy Speaker, I have always said that I will look at all proposals to reduce illegal migration and illegal entry to our country, and even those that the opposite benches might prepare to put forward, but we still wait for them. However, well, he says that. However, fundamentally, they don't think there is a problem, and that is why they don't have a solution, because they still remain and stand for open borders, pure and simple. Meanwhile, this government wants to get on with delivering, not just on what the British people want, but reforming our systems, so that they are firm, but equally, Madam Deputy Speaker, so that they are fair to those who pay for them and fair on those who need our help and support.
Shadow Home Secretary Yvette Cooper.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. This is a shambles, and it is shameful, and the Home Secretary has no one but herself to blame. This is not, and never has been, a serious policy, and she knew that when she chartered the plane. She knew that among the people she was planning to send to Rwanda on this plane were torture and trafficking victims. She knew she didn't have a proper screening process in place. She knew that some of them might be children. So can she confirm it was the Home Office itself that withdrew a whole series of these cases on Friday and yesterday because they knew there was a problem with these cases, that even without the European Court of Human Rights judgment, she was planning to send a plane with just 7 people on board because she'd had to withdraw most of the cases at the last minute. She knows that there is a lack of proper asylum capacity in Rwanda to make fair decisions, that as the UNHCR says, they only normally deal with a few hundred cases a year. There's normally only one eligibility officer who prepares the cases, and that's as well as the lack of interpreters or legal advice to ensure fair decisions. Now, she promised there will be extra payments to Rwanda for each person that is transferred, presumably to pay for those extra caseworkers or extra support, but she still refused to tell us how much. So what is she hiding? Will she tell us now how much she promised Rwanda for each of the people she was planning to send yesterday, and how many Rwandan refugees she promised to take in return? She knows that serious concerns have been raised about Rwandan restrictions on political freedom, on the treatment of people who are LGBT, on the fact that 12 refugees were shot by the authorities in 2018 for protesting against food cuts, on the fact that there have been Afghan and Syrian asylum seekers returned by Rwanda, and she knows that none of those concerns have been addressed. She knows too that the policy will not work. We need action to tackle dangerous criminal gangs who are putting lives at risk. But she knows that her policies won't achieve that, and that is not their objective. Because if it was, she would not have asked the National Crime Agency, whose job it is to target the criminal gangs, to draw up 20% staff cuts. That is potentially 1,000 people being cut from the organisation that works to tackle the gangs. So can she confirm, has she asked the NCA to draw up plans for staff cuts? If she was serious, she would be taking seriously the fact that the Israel-Rwanda deal ended up increasing criminal people trafficking and smuggling, and that her plan risks making things worse. And if it was, she would be working night and day to get a better joint plan with France to crack down on the gangs and to stop the boats being put into the water in the first place. But she isn't, because her her relationship with French ministers has totally broken down. If she was serious about tackling illegal migration, illegal economic migration, or cutting the bills for people in hotels, she would be speeding up Home Office decision-making so refugees can get support and those who aren't can be returned home. Instead, her decisions have totally collapsed from 28,000 a year to just 14,000 decisions a year, fewer than Belgium, the Netherlands, never mind Germany or France. And she's so badly failing to take those basic decisions, she is trying to pay a country thousands of miles away to take decisions for us instead. How shameful does that make us look around the world if our Home Office cannot take those basic decisions? She knew about problem after problem. With her policy, she knows this is unworkable, unethical, and won't stop the criminal gangs, but yet she still went ahead and spent £500,000 chartering a plane she never expected to fly. She still went ahead and wrote a £120 million cheque to Rwanda with a promise of more to come, and she still went ahead because all she really cares about is picking fights and finding someone else to blame. This isn't a long-term plan, it is a short-term stunt. Everyone can see it. It's not serious policy, it's shameless posturing, and she knows it. It's not building consensus, it's just pursuing division. It is government by gimmick. It's not in the public interest, it's just in their political interest. And what are they prepared to trash along the way? People's lives, our basic British values of fairness, decency and common sense, and the reputation of our nation. Our country is better than this. We've a long tradition of hard work and stepping up to tackle problems, not to offload them, to tackle the criminal gangs who put lives at risk, and to do right by refugees. That is what she should be doing now, and not this shambles that is putting our country to shame.
Madam Deputy Speaker, well, I always look forward to these exchanges in the House, it's fair to say. Primarily because, well, perhaps if you'd like to listen to them as well. Let me just respond by saying, as a point of education, if I may, for the Honourable Lady opposite, we're not the only country in the world to be adopting this approach, it's fair to say. The Right Honourable Lady may be aware, Madam Deputy Speaker, that it's an approach the EU have adopted through their EU transfer mechanism to Rwanda. And Denmark themselves are in the process, already in the process of looking at this. But she raises a number of points which are also factually incorrect. I'll come to you shortly, if you don't mind. That the purpose of the work that we are doing is absolutely, Madam Deputy Speaker, to break the business model of the people smugglers. And it's a shame, actually, that the party opposite, run down the National Crime Agency, because actually, calm down a second, because actually it's the UK intelligence community that are working together, tackling the people smugglers upstream, along with the way in which we invest in upstream programmes to tackle the people smugglers. But Madam Deputy Speaker, I've got more to say on this, of course, because the members opposite keep speaking about asylum seekers that have travelled from Iran, Iraq and other countries. But of course, they've come from France, Madam Deputy Speaker, a safe country. They haven't come from Iraq, they've come from France. In the same way the lady opposite says they've come from Syria, they've come from France. They've paid people smugglers, and they don't claim that it's immoral to send people back to European countries where their claims can be considered there. It is literally, Madam Deputy Speaker, the logic of the opposition seems to be that Rwanda is a wonderful country, good enough to host international summits and world dignitaries, but not for people to be relocated there, as our global partnership has demonstrated. And they know that people are dying in the Channel.
I feel I should apologise for inflicting this on you, but she is Home Secretary, and this gibberish is what currently passes for politics in our country. Sorry, though.
To pioneering a way forward. And of course, the party opposite are now clutching at straws when they come to speaking about money. But of course, you cannot put a price on lives that are lost, and we believe in saving lives and breaking the people smuggling model. And of course, Madam Deputy Speaker, when it comes to the claims, the legal claims that I think the Honourable Lady was referring to, pre-action protocol, NRM claims, I do not remember the lady opposite, the Shadow Home Secretary, making these points in this sort of synthetic hypothetical rage when she occupied the seat in a previous Labour government where they brought in acts and powers and passed the 1999 Act, the
Hello again,
2002
James here.
Act,
I'm going to clock off now, frankly.
to remove
I
people
go and,
with no legal
I don't know,
basis
stick my head
to
in a
be
drawer or something rather than hear any more of this, which means that Sheila Fogarty will be picking up when, and indeed if this ever ends, 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 and indeed if this ever ends.